All right. I'm Miikka Sainio, CTO of SSH Communications Security. We are a cybersecurity company and we create privileged access management solutions. Today we are going to talk a bit about IAM, IGA, PAM, and how they interact together. This is still an unnamed podcast or webcast, and let's see how this goes and if we figure out the name for this afterwards.
And I'm Jeff Lynch. I am an IAM consultant architect for Epical, working at the Stockholm office. We do a lot of consultant architect implementation of IAM and PAM solutions. Behind the camera, we have Ayat Khan, our sales executive at Epical. She'll be hosting today's unnamed webcast.
Yes. Hi, everybody. I'm Ayat Khan, and I work at the Gothenburg office for Epical, and I work in sales.
So let's start, guys. So can you define IGA, IAM, and PAM in your own words? So I think, shall we start with Miikka, you?
Well, sure. We can start with me. IAM is in an organization. It's the root of identity for the users. So it's basically tied to the HR processes. So when employees join an organization, they get added to the IAM system, they get added to certain groups, and after that they are kind of established within the organization, and IGA, which is Identity Governance and Administration, then can create accesses based on identity, or it can amend the identity within the identity management system. Mm-hmm. And IGA and IAM together can enable users to use specific applications, connect specific SharePoint sites, for example. But then when you need to further tighten the screw or kind of make the access more restricted, especially for critical and privileged access, then you introduce a PAM solution, which kind of further tightens down the screw. So,
yeah. The way I see it, and slightly different maybe, is that the identity governance and administration piece of it is helping the joiners, employees that are getting hired, consultants that are coming on board, so that they have their primary account, they get birthrights. If for some reason they move departments, then they get rid of the previous rights that they had at the other department and get the new rights of the new department. And then when they leave, when they end their employment, we can quickly get rid of the accounts, the access rights they're given. It also includes being able to request access to new access rights. And then even what I think of recertification, where a manager or application owner can recertify that I, Jeff, have the right access. Then I see privileged access management, as you say, tightening the screws. I think of credential management as one of the keys, session management as one of the keys, so that we log and record what the end users are doing when they're using these privileged accounts. And hopefully, in the best case scenario, they don't know their credentials because the PAM solution is managing them. And then above those two, I see IAM as kind of an umbrella. It could be a department or a program implementing PAM.
Great. So, like, if we go further into it, like, if we talk about like the limitations of it, why might IGA alone not be sufficient for comprehensive identity and access?
So as stated, I think IGA is doing the main joiner leaver request and approval recertification stuff, where it doesn't do the credential management. At least typically doesn't. It doesn't log and record the sessions where someone's accessing a server and fixing the infrastructure. So it doesn't do, they have to come together, the two solutions. And then you have the PAM solution, which, yes, you could have a just-in-time solution where you're asking for access. But let's say we don't talk about just-in-time, we're not talking about zero trust. Then you rely on a system like the IGA system to be able to request the privileged account and the access rights that you need to do your job. So they really go hand in hand together. They can't stand on their own, as I see it.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I'm looking at it from the PAM perspective, because we built a PAM solution, but we kind of expect that there's a root of identity for the user. and how that identity is defined and what accesses they have. That comes from the IGA system. So users can request access, they can request to kind of access to a specific system, specific site, and so forth. And that is then reflected either in the identity management system or directly in the PAM. But anyway, the kind of how the user is configured and what accesses they should have comes from to the PAM solutions from somewhere. And of course, PAM solutions may have kind of these override mechanisms for requesting access, which bypass IGA systems. But usually we try to obey the identity management system because the architecture is cleaner that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like if we just like in your thing, like what scenarios might PAM fall short in addressing security needs?
Well, like I said, I'm a PAM solution provider, so it doesn't fall short. But of course, PAM, like I said, PAM is only as good as the identity source. So it trusts that the identity source is up to date. And PAM solution, it's privileged access. So it may introduce some friction for the users to use the target systems. And that's by design because it's supposed to isolate the users from the target systems and the target systems from the users. So there is going to be some more friction on the actual usage of the systems. So it doesn't make necessarily sense for you to use it in the kind of the wider audience within our organization. So it makes sense to limit it for the privileged access or critical access. And of course, even if a PAM solution is deployed and it's taken into use in the infrastructure still needs to be monitored so that there's no PAM bypass. Because users are really creative and in figuring out ways to bypass systems which may make their work more difficult or kind of introduce friction, like I said. So monitoring PAM bypass is also important, but traditionally you do that via CM systems.
But also, and I agree with everything you said there. I can give another example. Maybe I kind of touched on it already, but I don't see a PAM solution itself as ever doing recertification, unless we're talking about a just-in-time solution where an account is created and then removed, let's say 2 hours later, because then you don't have to recertify that I, Jeff, have access to that account anymore because it's no longer there. But in an on-prem situation where you don't have that sort of create and remove solution from a PAM perspective, then you require an IGA solution to do the recertification campaigns. So just another example of maybe shortcoming if you were just to focus on PAM.
So I'm just going to focus more on PAM now, deeper, and ask you guys, why is PAM considered a critical component of a robust security strategy?
Should I start?
Yeah.
Right, so PAM aims to eliminate unauthorized use and insider threat. So say you have critical servers, critical data like people's health information or critical systems running, example, at power stations or somewhere else. And the purpose of a PAM solution is to protect that data and those systems. So to make sure that the users using those systems are actually authorized users. And also what PAM solutions do, they minimize the privileges that the users have in the target systems. So instead of having kind of wide open administrative access to a solution, PAM solution can narrow that access to a specific workflows or functions you can do within that system to ensure that you don't perhaps break something you shouldn't be breaking. And of course, PAM solution, so IAM, IGA, and then when you add to that log analysis or event management, they bring kind of reactive security in a sense that if a user has access to a system or has credentials to access a system, they can do things in that system. But when you introduce, and then you can analyze if something bad happens from the logs, you can analyze what happened in the system and why they or who did what for the system to go down, for example. But what PAM solutions bring is proactive security. So all the connections go through the PAM solution. The PAM solution can, first of all, it can restrict access. It can add context limitations to that access. So where is the user connecting or client connecting from, what time of day it is, and so forth. And it can block access if the connection is abnormal. And then, of course, there are kind of new machine learning-based user entity behavioral analytics components which enable you to learn usage patterns within the connections and block access automatically if the connection seems abnormal. So to me, PAM solutions, kind of the primary function is to isolate the users from the target systems and make it so that the users don't have permanent credentials to access the target systems. So PAM handles that through ephemeral certificates and password vaulting and all that. But yeah, so target system isolation from end users and restricting the access as needed.
Yeah, and you talk a lot about principle of least privilege, preventing the long-standing access, as you were just mentioning. And I think a bit more of what I see is maybe going back to kind of the base of a PAM solution is that credential management piece. You see a lot of social engineering today with AI coming. It's getting better. They can really via these fantastic emails, try to socially engineer your credentials from you.
We could have done this podcast with Notebook LM.
And if we take away those credentials, whether it's keys or whether it's passwords from the end users, then they can never give them away. So the core, when I think of a PAM solution, is the vaulting of these credentials and initiating the sessions through the PAM solution so that the end user never has to type in the password to get the session started. And then you touched on it, but the screen recording is another piece of the puzzle that you can feed into the CM SOC team so that they can do security, incident management, and incident security management. So I think screen recording is also very key to the incident piece of the puzzle, but it can also be used in a positive way where you have a small team that's managing an application. And I'm going to be away next week, and I'm the one that always does X, Y, and Z, whatever those are. Then my teammates can watch what I did last time, so they can do it when I'm away.
We definitely have seen usage of that as a training function as well. So
With your experiences, like what are your, if we go to some specific experiences regarding PAM, like where PAM has played an instrumental role in helping companies become more secure, like would you like to share some of those?
I mean, our company is called the SSH Communications Security, and that's due to the fact that our founder invented the SSH protocol way back in the 90s. And we have been creating products in and around the SSH protocol since then. And SSH key management has been one of the functions. We have seen massive customer infrastructures with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of hosts, for example, and millions of SSH keys. And the challenge is that actually nobody knows what those SSH public keys are used for, or they are basically uncontrolled keys. And if you have a SSH public key on a system, it means that there's a private key out there somewhere. And the problem with the SSH private key is that it can travel, it can be copied, it can be used from wherever. So basically the security posture of the infrastructure is unknown. So when we started building our PAM solution, we started solving this problem. And we solved the problem by introducing authentication via ephemeral certificates. So enabling users to connect the target system using short-lived certificates instead of long-standing passwords or long-standing keys. And we have been able to bring massive SSH infrastructures to ephemeral authentication or just-in-time authentication. And this has happened in finance, in internet, retail, in semiconductor manufacturing. There are kind of a lot of use cases just for the SSH protocol. But then when we also have added or have introduced support for different access methods, be that via Windows remote access, RDP protocol, HTTP protocol, and so forth. So kind of enabling that same functionality throughout customer infrastructures has been very valuable, and we have done that in many different contexts. So operational technology, or OT, is one of the rising kind of customer segments for us. So PAM solution is being used not just in the IT, but also in OT side for securing access to, for example, kind of an outlier, but for ships at sea. So having remote engineering access to ships, being able to monitor them, being able to, for example, order spare parts in advance before the ship arrives at port, and then actually managing port infrastructure. That's also one of the use cases for the PAM solution. So there are a lot of different use cases for a PAM solution, and the primary function is to ensure that only the authorized people have access to the critical infrastructure, critical data and critical infrastructure as needed.
I have to say, with our new partnership, I look forward to implementing and managing PrivX in the near future. But if I go back to my previous experience, the majority of the work I've done with PAM, it's in the financial sector, it's in the manufacturing sector. And to not dig into the technical side of things, but more take a different perspective here, is it's external, internal regulatory bodies, it's directives, it's standards that companies need to follow. So a lot of compliance and certifications that these companies are required to prove and show. In the financial sector, we had the ECB, we had local Nordic financial authorities that were doing audits, making sure that we were implementing these solutions in the right way, both PAM and IGA. The international standards that come with ISO 27001, doing a lot of work even currently in that area to help companies be certified. And then sometimes, I wish more often these companies had really strong CISOs and there was a real strong internal audit push.
Yeah.
But in some of my experiences, at least you have that, and that really helps to move things along.
Yeah, I mean, compliance it's a nice driving factor, but I think that also ransomware and actual hacks are a really good, unfortunately, driving factor. So, and I mean, we have seen a lot of, well, now it seems that it happens on the OT side, but a lot of companies fall victim to ransomware. And how do ransomware kind of scripts actually spread? It's through unauthorized access. It's through having no controls within the infrastructure. So basically having perimeter-based security. So everything is within the one network, and if something is infected, it can infect other components within the network. And that's why we have been talking about zero trust, or zero trust is kind of an overhyped term at the moment, but there are solid fundamentals in it. Basically, it means that there's no implicit trust within the infrastructure. So all the access between users and target systems, between components, it's always authenticated as needed. So I think that it's definitely needed. And compliance is one thing, but I hope that the real life, physical or security implications are also considered.
Stories left and right out there. So yeah, you want to make sure you protect yourself from those attacks happening in your own backyard, right? So yeah, I agree.
So when it comes to implementation, like it seems like implementing successful implementations of PAM, what essential factors does one need to consider when implementing a PAM solution?
I think when it comes to implementations, one of the things that I've always pushed really strong for is not scoping too much at the beginning. We talk about SSH and Linux servers. We talk about RDP in Windows. We talk about database access. We talk about network access. We have cloud access, EC2s, for example, in AWS. If you have a small team or you're in a small company, you try to focus on too much at once, I think you run into big problems. That's where your setting yourself up for failure, because you have to provide education, you have to provide communication, and it's different for each of these platforms, each of these types of privileged access. So if you can focus, build a roadmap, prioritize based on risk analysis. Maybe you start with on-prem or you start with the cloud, and you can move there after you've implemented it, whatever you wanted to start with first, and after you've succeeded.
Yeah, so don't boil the ocean at once.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. From the PAM point of view, like we talked about earlier, because PAM enforces the accesses defined in the identity management system, it is quite important that the identity management system is up to date. So kind of the groups are there, how users are distributed within the organization has been defined, and it's the kind of the identity management system is in good order before you kind of deploy the PAM solution. And also this applies to IGA as well, of course. But PAM solution is only as good as the kind of the access data, the identity data that the access is based on.
Yeah, in a perfect world, you want to have a proper IGA solution first.
Yeah.
But if there's a small piece of the puzzle that you know is in good enough shape, you don't have to wait for an entire IGA solution. So you can get started earlier in those cases.
So like, like organizations, how can they today ensure that their PAM solution is like integrated effectively with their existing IT structure? What challenges might arise when you're in this process? Like what does your experience reflect?
Of course, from the PAM perspective, it helps if the customer knows what the infrastructure is, what assets do they have, what target systems exist, so that the kind of the access infrastructure or the access model can be defined, and the role structures within the PAM solution can be defined. That's one thing. It helps. Of course, you can build it in pieces, but it helps that you have awareness that what do you have, what are the critical systems, what do I need to protect first, and what do I? So, for example, if you connect via the PAM solution, which accesses need to be audited, which need to be recorded, and then you also PAM solution or PAM is always a deployment project in the sense that the infrastructure needs to be onboarded to the PAM solution, which means that it might mean, like, for example, on a simple case like virtual servers, you may need to change the SSH configuration, or you need to configure a Windows domain to trust the PAM solution for ephemeral certificates. But it's something that you need to design and kind of create a project plan for that. And then going to the criticality of the system. So do you need to, is it going to be a multi-site setup? Do you have different sites which you need to protect? Can you handle that within one PAM solution, or do you need to have fallback site-specific PAM solutions? What about break glass? So what if the PAM is down? How do users connect to the target systems and so forth? So having a fallback mechanism, all that needs to be designed.
Yeah, the design piece of it is very important, but I would also like to add the process side of things. If I go back to one of my first implementations, we did this activity where we went through AD and we found all the service accounts and we onboarded the service accounts, but we didn't manage the credentials. There was no process to make sure that when a new service account was created, that it was onboarded properly. We didn't know if in one country there would be a manual team provisioning or if there was automation in place. So building the process end to end before you implement in a technical solution, I think is really key. A lot of times you'll hear these horror stories. A company has purchased the most expensive PAM solution or IGA solution, and there was no processes around it.
Yeah.
And in the end, it took
deployment is going to take years.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think processes are really key, along with the design. And then, as I mentioned before, and I won't dig too deep into it, but you need to have management and CISO support behind you. You have to have the mandate because you're going to get people fighting it. It's something new. It's changing the way they work.
Yeah, I mean, changing the kind of people's workflows, it's a painful thing, but sometimes it needs to be done. And of course, it helps if you, like what we have tried to do with our PAM solution is to build it in a way that actually it helps people to achieve their objectives. It doesn't inhibit the work too much. So instead of, for example, if you need to find a target system you need to access, instead of going to a wiki page and trying to find an IP address, you can just log into the PAM solution, see all the target systems you are entitled to access based on your role configuration. That's quite convenient. Actually, I think that our customers are already finding that quite convenient, and that's why they like us.
And I can also add to that the credential management, to keep banging on that. I mean, I've been in some clients where they've got so many environments, so many domains, that they have different privileged accounts per domain, and they're expected to remember or memorize really long, complex passwords, and they end up putting sticky notes on their computer or easy ways to remember those credentials. So taking those credentials away from them makes their life easier.
Jeff, you just mentioned that management and CISO support is super important. What role does user training and awareness play in the success of PAM initiative? How can organizations, businesses effectively educate their employees about these, security measures? Like,
I think we just touched upon it, but people management is everything in these implementations, because you are changing the way that people work.
Yeah.
Now they've got a new solution or a new tool in front of them before they can get to their Windows server or their Linux server, whatever it may be. So setting up clear education, training packages. One of the best things I've done is had, not face-to-face always, but town hall type sessions where you invite teams, application teams, departments. You explain the what, the why, the how, the timing, and then you also allow them to ask the questions, the hard questions, because there's going to be a small percentage of these people that, I guess majority of them don't want to change, but there's going to be a small percentage that are going to yell and be loud. So allow them to vent, listen to their concerns, and then explain again why we're doing this, what the benefits are, and how it's going to help them.
Yeah, I mean, usually organizations already have security trainings. So why don't you click on links on emails, for example? So there are different security trainings which exist, which try to prevent ransomware. But having a PAM solution in place is just the next step for that. So people usually understand that instead of my workstation having access to the whole infrastructure, there's a kind of a control point in place, which if for some reason I make a mistake, it doesn't mean that I can basically destroy or hurt the company infrastructure. So it's to protect the company, but it's also to protect you. So it's more difficult to make mistakes.
Interesting. So thank you guys. This was so much fun. And all three of us would love to connect with everybody that's listening to this unnamed podcast. And our details will be linked below later on, and would love to take this topic further with all of you. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Ayat. This was fun. Hopefully we can figure out the name for this podcast.
Thank you. And I look forward to working together with you to next.
That was.